What's up, awesome YouTubers? Ryan1988 or Justin back here to do a video for you all. I know it's been a few weeks since my last video. Need a little bit of a break after all those fun October videos, but I thought I would throw in a review, at least one, before the Thanksgiving holiday, and talk about a underrated Thanksgiving horror movie. And when you see this film, you'll probably think, is it Thanksgiving? And in my eyes, yes, because at least the last half of this movie takes place in November. The main part of the movie takes place in November. And I'm talking about 1986's Deadly Friend, Wes Craven's Deadly Friend. This is the Scream Factory release, Blu-ray release that we got about 4 years ago. And I'm so happy that Scream Factory released this movie. This was such an such an underrated and hard movie to find for a very long time. I remember before the DVD release, trying to track down a VHS copy of this movie or watching it somehow was really hard. And it wasn't until '09, or no, I'm sorry, '07, when Warner Brothers released a DVD release of the movie. It was part of a kind of line of films that they had done. Someone's Watching Me was a part of it, Eyes of a Stranger. So there's a lot of movies in '07 that Warner Brothers released part of a terror pack. It was a release of movies, in under the line of like terror or something. Um, and Deadly Friend was one of them. I go back though with Deadly Friend back in the mid '90s when uh you know TNT played Monster Vision, and it was Joe Bob Briggs hosting the show, and he would at least put on two movies like on a Saturday night. And I remember going through the channels and coming across the ending of this movie. And I had no idea what I was watching. I was very young. It was the end of the film, but the ending in the morgue got me. And I had that scene in my mind for the longest time. And then you jump to '07, the DVD came out, and I was so happy because now I finally had this movie where that one scene really stood out for me as a kid, and I can watch the whole entire thing, and I loved it. Absolutely loved it. It was the first time in '07 that I watched the whole entire movie and, just fell in love with it. Wes Craven movies in the '80s were underrated overall. You had his classics like A Nightmare on Elm Street come out, and then prior to that, you had Last House on the Left, and you had The Hills Have Eyes. But there was a big gap of his movies that were released that eventually kind of just fell under the radar. And Deadly Friend was one of them. I think of Deadly Blessing, and I think of so many other Wes Craven movies that, eventually became cult classics. People started watching them on VHS, DVD, Blu-ray. TV was a big thing. You had, you know, TV channels like TNT, the Sci-Fi Channel, AMC, playing all these old school horror movies. And this is the way that, at least for me, and I'm sure a lot of you, watch these movies for the first time. Or maybe you went to the video store, the mom and pop video stores, where you went down the horror movie aisles and you came across all these obscure covers that just really attracted you to them. And you went home and rented them, or went home and watched them. I know for a fact that, well, I know that, in, the '90s, or growing up with my mom, let me just say that we watched a lot of horror movies together. I was able to watch them with her. There were certain ones I couldn't watch, but there was also some that I could watch with her. And we would go to the video store and we would rent these movies. And I would normally, go by what the cover looked like. Like if that cover looked great, I wanted to rent that movie. And a lot of the movies stayed with me in my mind, and I would later own them on Blu-ray, DVD, 4K, whatever it may be. Deadly Friend was one of those movies where, I saw it on TV, saw the ending, just the ending of it, and I wanted to own this movie and watch the whole entire film. So Deadly Friend came out in 1986. It was 2 years after A Nightmare on Elm Street. I love the trailer because the trailer, says something in the line of, the next terror from Nightmare on Elm Street is Deadly Friend. And they were really amping this up to be like, scarier, if not, up to the same level of scares like Nightmare on Elm Street, which it's not. I do find there are moments that are eerie, and the real life horrors of abuse are scary in this movie, but the movie overall has a lot of things going for it. It's camp, first of all. There's a lot of campy moments in the movie. The famous basketball death scene. There's suspense in the film. I find there's a couple eerie moments in the movie. The concept, again, moments throughout the movie are horrific and, nightmarish, rather it's, again, real life abuse that happens or nightmares that happen in this movie. There's scares in this, very minor, but there's scares in the movie. And then the movie is just pure entertainment, and it has heart. So it has a mix of everything in it. Um, the movie follows a character by the name of Paul. He moves into this neighborhood with his mom. He has this robot with him, and he meets the girl next door, Christy Swanson, on the cover. Buffy the Vampire fame, Flowers in the Attic, so many movies. She was in a lot of 80s and 90s stuff, Mannequin 2 on the Move. Grew up watching her stuff, love her movies. But this was her first, I believe, movie, or one of her first big movies that she was in. And again, she plays the girl next door that he is in love with, and they build this friendship. She winds up in an accident, that's all I'll say if you haven't seen the movie. And he's in denial, like he wants to bring her back. Like, she's brain dead at one point in this movie and dies, and he brings her back with a chip by putting it in her head. And when she wakes up, she has a lot of robot qualities. And I won't say where the chip comes from if you haven't seen the movie. There is a robot in this film named BB that Paul is friends with. He created. Something happens with BB, and things go on after that. But when she wakes up, she loves Paul. Like, Paul is her person, but everybody else around her, if they did something to her, or if they go after Paul, she goes after them. So it's an 80s version of Frankenstein, pretty much. And again, the film is a Thanksgiving movie. It has a sort of fall atmosphere to it. I believe, like, the movie starts in September, goes into the Halloween season where the first incident with BB happens. And then you have that last act of the movie, maybe the last half of the film, where a good portion of it takes place around the Thanksgiving holiday and a little bit after Thanksgiving, but it's around there. I try to find movies, horror movies to watch in November on Thanksgiving around this time, because there's not a lot of Thanksgiving horror movies. You have films like Blood Rage, Thanksgiving, that came out a couple of years ago. One of my personal favorites, which I totally think is a Thanksgiving horror movie, but they don't say Thanksgiving, is Your Next. Deadly Friend would be on that list. I watch it. I try to watch it every November, and try to find just kind of horror movies that could possibly be these holiday watches for you. Because, we have October, we have all these scary movies that we watch. Then you have December where we jump into some, scary movies that take place around Christmas. Thanksgiving, you don't have too many. So if you're wanting to mix it up this year and watch something, I highly recommend Deadly Friend. If you've never seen the movie, watch it. I don't know if it's streaming or not, but if you want to pick up the Scream Factory Blu-ray, or Arrow is, or they have already released their version of the film, it's a UK Blu-ray, you could pick that up. But I highly recommend it. You're going to get fun, cheesy practical effects, fun for the 80s, that's what it was there for. I love the practical effects in this movie. You're going to get some, emotional heart in this movie between the two main characters. And you're going to be entertained throughout the whole film. There's some scary moments, suspenseful moments, but the movie has a lot of different emotions in the film. So I highly recommend Wes Craven's Deadly Friend. It doesn't get enough love. It doesn't get enough talk. I'm glad Scream Factory released this because for the longest time we only had a bare bones DVD and you can only watch it on VHS. So now you have this, and again, it's been out for about 4 years now, but you get some great interviews, including one with Christy Swanson. She talks about making the movie, how it was her first major movie, working with the late Wes Craven. She kind of gets choked up when she talks about him. He created an impact for her while making this movie, and she has memories of him. I love the character of BB the robot. And then you have Anne Ramsey, the main villain, the main villain mom from the Goonies. So if you know who she is, and she has a hysterical moment in the film, which I won't talk too much about, but it does involve a basketball. So, you probably know what it is. But anyway, I recommend Deadly Friend, Wes Craven's Deadly Friend, if you're trying to find just a movie to watch during this week's Thanksgiving holiday. So, Deadly Friend right there. But I hope you enjoyed this video, everybody. I really appreciate you watching. I've wanted to talk about this movie for a minute. I rewatched it last week, and I thought it would be such a great video, or such a great movie to make a video on. So, I hope you enjoyed my review. Check out Deadly Friend, and I'll talk to you soon. So, as always, you all are awesome, you all rock. In with a positive, out with a negative. And I'll talk to you later. And much love. Bye.